polished marble lobby shone under bright lights as the guard, tall and stern, stood by the main entrance, watching people come and go. His eyes followed each person intently, his stance straight and unyielding. The guard liked his job, enjoyed the small power he held over the entrance, his authority in deciding who was allowed through those glass doors. Today was no different. He had a sense of pride in keeping things orderly, his gaze sharp, almost unkind, as he assessed every person who walked in. He rarely smiled, and when he did, it was only for those who looked the part, dressed well, exuding status. He believed he could tell the difference between important people and those who didn't belong. Just as he glanced down at his watch, he noticed a man approaching. The man walked calmly, his steps quiet and steady. He wore an understated yet elegant outfit, and there was a quiet confidence in his stride. Yet, something about him made the guard frown. The man didn't wear a suit, didn't have a briefcase, didn't look like the executives and professionals the guard was used to letting in. In the guard's eyes, this man looked out of place. The guard stiffened, his eyes narrowing slightly as the man approached, his gaze firm and ready to intercept him. When the man reached the door, he looked the guard in the eye, giving a polite nod. "Good morning," he said, his tone calm and respectful, almost casual. There was a slight warmth to his voice, a self-assurance that hinted he wasn't accustomed to being questioned. But the guard didn't notice this. Instead, he crossed his arms, blocking the way with a slight shift of his stance. "Can I help you?" the guard asked, his voice polite but firm, his expression unreadable. The man held the guard's gaze, his calm expression unchanging, almost amused. "Yes, I'm here for a meeting on the top floor," he replied, his voice steady, as if he expected no trouble. The guard's brow furrowed, a slight smirk forming at the corner of his mouth. He looked the man up and down, eyes lingering on the simple attire, the lack of any obvious signs of importance. "I think you're mistaken," he said almost condescendingly. "This is a private building. We don't allow people to just stroll in off the street." The man's face remained calm, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a hint of something. Maybe disappointment, maybe humor. "I understand," he said simply, "but I assure you, I have a meeting scheduled here. Could you please check with your supervisor?" The guard's smirk faded. He didn't like being questioned, especially by someone he'd already decided didn't belong. "I don't need to call anyone. I know who's allowed in, and it isn't you." His tone was final, dismissive. The man nodded, seeming to take in the situation, a slight smile forming, almost as if he found this amusing. "All right then," he said, his voice calm and composed. "I'll be around." He took a step back, pausing for a moment to glance at the guard, the faint smile still on his face before turning and walking toward a nearby bench in the lobby area. The guard watched him with a hint of satisfaction, feeling a sense of accomplishment for upholding the building's order. As the man settled onto the bench, he pulled out his phone, his face relaxed and unbothered. The guard watched him for a moment longer, before turning his attention back to the entrance, feeling smugly reassured that he had done his job well. In his mind, the man's calm demeanor was a thin disguise for a failed attempt to enter somewhere he didn't belong. The guard didn't know that the next 15 minutes would change everything he thought he understood about this moment, and about the man he had just turned away. The guard shifted his attention back to the flow of people entering the building, the man already fading from his mind as he scanned the faces around him. He felt confident, even a bit proud about the encounter. To him, the rules were simple. People like that man didn't just walk into places like this. He had done his job, just as he always did, keeping out anyone who didn't fit. Yet, as he glanced around the lobby, he noticed a few people throwing curious glances toward the man sitting calmly on the bench. Some even paused, their expressions tinged with a faint recognition or surprise, as though they were seeing someone they hadn't expected. The guard frowned slightly, a sliver of doubt creeping in. He dismissed it quickly, convinced that he hadn't misjudged anything. But just as he was settling back into his routine, a young assistant from the building's upper floors hurried across the lobby, her heels clicking urgently against the polished floor. She came to a sudden stop near the man on the bench. her face lighting up with a mixture of surprise and excitement as she recognized him. Leaning in slightly, she whispered something that the guard couldn't hear, but he caught the delighted expression on her face, her wide smile, and the slight bow of respect she gave. The man on the bench nodded in acknowledgement, giving her a brief, warm smile before gesturing for her to continue on her way. She looked over her shoulder at him as she walked away, her face still showing a trace of awe, almost as if she couldn't believe she had just spoken to him. The guard watched this exchange closely. His earlier confidence now wavered slightly. The assistant was someone he knew. She worked directly under one of the top executives, and she never showed that kind of respect to just anyone. As the guard puzzled over the scene, the man casually glanced at his watch, seeming completely at ease. The guard's eyes followed the assistant as she disappeared into the elevator, an unsettling feeling brewing in his gut. But he quickly shook it off, unwilling to let go of his earlier assumptions. The guard straightened his posture, trying to refocus, but his mind kept circling back to the assistant's reaction. He couldn't shake the memory of her surprised smile, the respect in her body language. It was unusual, almost unsettling. The man on the bench continued to sit quietly, seemingly unaffected, his expression calm and collected as he checked his phone. There was no hint of impatience or frustration on his face, just a quiet confidence, as though he had all the time in the world. Moments later, a well-dressed older gentleman, clearly a senior executive, entered the lobby. He walked with purpose, his eyes scanning the room, and the guard immediately recognized him as one of the high-ranking officials in the building. The guard nodded in acknowledgement, hoping to affirm his own authority, but the executive's eyes barely glanced his way before they locked onto the man on the bench. The guard's heart skipped a beat as he watched the executive's face transform, first into recognition, then into mild alarm. Without hesitating, the executive walked straight over to the man, his expression a blend of urgency and respect. The man rose to his feet, and the two exchanged a firm handshake, their quiet conversation carrying an undeniable air of familiarity and mutual regard. The guard watched, his stomach twisting as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The executive, usually reserved and formal, was speaking with an unusual warmth, even deference. It dawned on the guard that this was no ordinary visitor. A flicker of panic began to build inside him, even as he tried to maintain a stoic exterior. He clenched his jaw, his mind racing, wondering if he had just made a serious mistake. As the guard stood there, tension creeping up his spine, he strained to catch snippets of the conversation between the man and the executive. The executive's voice was low but laced with urgency, words slipping out just loudly enough for fragments to reach the guard's ears. "Apologies. Wasn't informed. If I had known." The executive's face was etched with worry, and he gestured toward the elevators as if eager to escort the man personally. The man, however, remained calm and unbothered, nodding thoughtfully, a faint smile playing on his lips as he reassured the executive. "No need to apologize. I understand." His tone was polite, almost forgiving, as though this minor inconvenience barely registered with him. Yet there was something in his gaze, a quiet authority, a silent reminder of his status. Realization hit the guard like a punch. This man wasn't just an important visitor. He was someone with immense influence, perhaps even someone vital to the company. Panic began to claw at the guard's insides, his pulse quickening as his earlier arrogance crumbled. He had turned away a person of high importance, someone whom even the senior executives treated with respect and caution. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation, the guard stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir," he said, forcing a smile and trying to inject politeness into his voice, "I apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. If you'd like, I can, escort you upstairs myself." But his words came out stiff, his voice betraying the anxiety simmering beneath the surface. The man turned slowly, his eyes meeting the guard's with a calm, unreadable expression. He studied the guard for a moment, silent, his gaze steady and piercing. It was a look that seemed to peel away the guard's defenses. exposing the haste and assumptions he had acted on just moments before. After a pause that felt like an eternity, the man gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you," he replied, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the guard's stomach twist even tighter. The guard stepped back, his face flushing as he processed the man's restrained response, feeling the weight of his mistake pressing down on him. The executive shot the guard a brief, disappointed look, adding to the pressure. Without another word, the executive turned back to the man, gesturing toward the elevator with a respectful wave of his arm, as if inviting royalty. The man followed him, his stride composed and dignified, while the guard stood rooted in place, forced to watch them walk away. As they neared the elevator, a couple of other employees noticed the man and immediately straightened up, nodding in acknowledgement as he passed. Some even whispered among themselves, exchanging surprised glances, clearly aware of who he was. The guard felt his heart sink lower with every reaction. Each nod and respectful glance felt like a silent reminder of his ignorance, his misjudgment. The elevator doors slid open, and the executive held them politely as the man stepped inside. Before the doors closed, the man glanced back at the guard one last time. His expression was still calm, but there was something in his eyes, disappointment, maybe a hint of pity, that seemed to cut through the guard more deeply than any reprimand could. Then, without another word, the doors closed, and the man and the executive disappeared from view. The lobby suddenly felt empty and quiet, as if the air itself had grown heavier. The guard stood there, his face flushed with a mix of embarrassment and dread. A few employees nearby exchanged glances, some shaking their heads subtly, others casting him sympathetic but knowing looks. He realized now that everyone understood the gravity of his error, and he could feel his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. As the guard stood there, numb and motionless, a flood of thoughts tumbled through his mind. His earlier confidence had shattered, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread that grew with every second. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind, the way he had dismissed the man, the assumptions he had made based on nothing but his own misguided judgment. Now it was painfully clear that he had misread the situation entirely, and the weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a lead blanket. Just then, a soft chime echoed through the lobby, and the guard snapped to attention, realizing that a few of his superiors were approaching. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression and sharp eyes, looked directly at him, her face reflecting a mixture of disapproval and frustration. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze unwavering as she assessed him. He tried to stand taller, forcing himself to maintain composure, but the shame was written plainly on his face. "Can you explain what happened here?" she asked, her voice low and controlled, each word laced with a tension that made the guard's heart race. The guard opened his mouth, struggling to find the right words, but all that came out was a jumble of excuses. I didn't realize. He didn't look," he stammered, the confidence in his voice now replaced by a shaky uncertainty. The woman's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew colder as he tried to explain himself. "He didn't look like what?" she asked pointedly, her tone edged with a disappointment that made his stomach twist. "Like someone who deserves respect? Like someone who might be important to this company?" Her questions hit him hard, each one cutting through his feeble defenses, and he realized he had no answer that could justify his actions. The guard swallowed hard, feeling his throat tighten as he stood in silence under his superior's unforgiving gaze. He could feel the eyes of a few onlookers fixed on him, their quiet judgment adding to the humiliation creeping up his spine. Each second of silence felt heavier, stretching the tension until it became almost unbearable. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by his lack of response. "Let me make this very clear," she began, her voice steady and deliberate. "The man you turned away is Mr. Dawson. He is not just a guest. He's one of our largest investors. Do you understand the significance of that?" A cold wave of realization washed over the guard as the name sank in. He had heard of Mr. Dawson, of course. Anyone in the company had. He was a figure of immense influence, someone who didn't just hold financial power, but commanded respect through his reputation and accomplishments. Yet the guard had dismissed him without a second thought, simply because he didn't fit his narrow expectations. "Yes, ma'am," he murmured, barely able to meet her eyes. His voice was barely a whisper, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew that apologies wouldn't be enough to undo the damage he had caused, but it was all he could muster in the moment. I didn't know. I made a mistake." Her expression softened only slightly, more out of pity than understanding. "A mistake," she repeated almost to herself, letting the word linger. She took a step closer, her gaze penetrating. "This isn't just about one person. It's about how you see people, how quickly you judge them. That's something this company does not and will not tolerate." She paused, letting her words sink in, and the guard felt the truth of them like a weight he couldn't lift. He understood now that this was more than a mistake. It was a flaw in his thinking, one that had cost him dearly. He lowered his head, feeling a sense of regret so deep it made his hands tremble. The guard stood there, feeling utterly exposed, his gaze fixed on the polished marble floor as his supervisor's words reverberated in his mind. The lobby, once a place where he felt in control, now felt vast and unwelcoming, a place where his authority meant nothing. He could feel his colleagues' eyes on him, the quiet murmurs that accompanied his supervisor's reprimand, each whisper a reminder of his lapse in judgment. His hands clenched at his sides, not out of defiance but from a futile attempt to keep himself steady. The silence hung heavily for a moment before his supervisor spoke again, this time softer but no less stern. "You may not have known who he was, but that doesn't excuse treating someone with such disregard. This isn't how we conduct ourselves here," she said, each word a gentle but firm admonishment. "Every individual who enters this building deserves respect, regardless of how they look or what you assume about them." He nodded, unable to argue, feeling the weight of her disappointment pressing down on him. The guard wanted to explain, to somehow make her understand that he hadn't meant any harm, that he'd been doing his job the way he thought he was supposed to. But he realized how shallow those justifications sounded, even to himself. There was no getting around the fact that he had let his biases lead him astray. Just then, the elevator doors at the end of the lobby opened with a soft ding, and out stepped Mr. Dawson, flanked by the senior executive who had guided him upstairs. The guard's heart skipped as he caught sight of the man once more, his calm and dignified expression unchanging. Mr. Dawson glanced around the lobby, his gaze briefly resting on the guard, who stood frozen, shame washing over him like a wave. The senior executive leaned in and spoke quietly to Mr. Dawson, and then, after a moment's pause, Mr. Dawson gave a small nod. He began walking toward the exit, his stride measured and poised as if nothing unusual had happened. The guard felt a knot tighten in his chest as Mr. Dawson approached, unable to predict what, if anything, he would say. As Mr. Dawson approached, the guard's breath caught, his pulse hammering in his ears. Every step the man took seemed to echo in the quiet lobby, each one bringing with it an unbearable tension. When he finally reached the guard, he paused, studying him with that same calm, unreadable gaze. The guard felt rooted to the spot, unable to look away, bracing himself for whatever words might come. Mr. Dawson's face remained impassive, but there was a slight glint in his eyes, something almost compassionate, though it was layered with a quiet disappointment. He spoke in a low, steady voice that was free of anger, yet carried a weight that made the guard feel small. "I understand you were doing your job," Mr. Dawson said slowly, his voice measured and calm. "But sometimes our job is more than just following the rules." The guard swallowed, his mouth suddenly dry. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, his face hot with shame. He wanted to apologize, to explain, but the words stuck in his throat, lost in the presence of Mr. Dawson's calm authority. Mr. Dawson continued, his tone softening slightly, though it still held a certain gravity. "People aren't always what they seem. It's easy to make assumptions, to believe you know who belongs and who doesn't, just by looking at them." His eyes held the guard's, the disappointment there softened by an unexpected kindness. "But those assumptions can be costly." The guard felt his defenses crumble further, his hands clenched at his sides in silent acknowledgement of the truth in Mr. Dawson's words. He could sense that this wasn't just about him, it was a broader lesson, a chance to confront his own narrow perspective. Mr. Dawson took a small step back, nodding as if to himself, and after a moment's pause, he added quietly, "I hope you'll remember this." With a final knowing look, he turned and walked away, leaving the guard standing in silence, his mind awash with the implications of what he had just heard. The sound of Mr. Dawson's steps faded, but the weight of his words lingered, settling heavily on the guard's heart. The guard stood frozen, his eyes following Mr. Dawson's retreating figure, until he disappeared through the revolving doors. The weight of the conversation hung heavily on him, pressing down with an intensity he hadn't felt before. Dawson's calm words had been a quiet, cutting mirror, reflecting back the guard's actions in a way that was undeniable. The guard realized that his role wasn't simply about enforcing rules, but about seeing people fully, without allowing his own judgments to cloud the truth. And he had failed, badly. He'd let his pride, his assumptions, dictate his response, and now he was left standing in the aftermath of his mistake, painfully aware of the impact. Around him, the lobby buzzed back to life, though the guard felt detached from it, as if he were an outsider in the very place he had once ruled over with quiet authority. He glanced over to where his supervisor was still standing, her expression softened, but still tinged with the disappointment he knew he'd earned. She gave him a long, hard look, and he could see that the consequences of his actions weren't just emotional. They would likely be career-altering. The guard tried to steady himself, taking a deep breath, yet he couldn't shake the twisting feeling in his chest. It wasn't just the potential fallout that troubled him, though he knew he might lose his position. It was the nagging realization that Dawson had seen right through him. There had been no anger in the man's words, no harsh rebuke, only a calm reminder of what he had failed to do, to look beyond appearances, to treat everyone who walked through that lobby with the same dignity, the same respect. Mr. Dawson's words had been a lesson and a quiet warning, as if he knew the guard's life would be different from this point on, whether he recognized it or not. Lost in thought, the guard barely noticed when a young intern approached him, her expression tentative, her voice soft. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone genuine but cautious, as if she didn't want to intrude but couldn't ignore his troubled face. The guard blinked, caught off guard by her kindness, and for a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Her question was simple, but it reminded him of the very thing he had overlooked in his encounter with Dawson. A basic sense of empathy, the ability to see others as individuals, not just as roles or appearances. He managed a faint nod, clearing his throat. "Yes, I think I will be," he said, though even he didn't entirely believe it. He knew he would have to confront the repercussions, both from his superiors and within himself. The intern gave him a small, sympathetic smile before moving away, leaving him once again alone with his thoughts. A few minutes later, the supervisor approached him once more, her demeanor slightly more compassionate, but still firm. "I want you to take the rest of the day off," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Take some time to think about what happened here." Her eyes held his, a silent message in their depths that told him she hadn't entirely given up on him, but that this was a line he couldn't cross again. The guard nodded slowly, the realization settling in that he needed to face this with humility, to take the lesson Dawson had left him and let it shape him. He felt the burden of his actions more acutely now, but alongside it, a sliver of resolve began to grow within him. He didn't know what the future held for him in this building, but he knew that, regardless of the outcome, he wouldn't be the same man standing at the entrance tomorrow. With a final solemn nod to his supervisor, he turned and walked toward the exit, his steps slower, his mind replaying each moment, each choice he had made, and the words that had shown him how much he had yet to learn. As the guard stepped outside the building, he felt the cool air hit him, a stark contrast to the heated embarrassment and regret still churning inside him. The sounds of the bustling city, the hum of cars, and the distant chatter of people filled the space around him. but he barely noticed any of it. Each step he took felt heavy, almost as if he were carrying the weight of his actions on his shoulders. He replayed the entire encounter with Mr. Dawson over and over, each detail sharper now, more significant. His mind went back to Dawson's calm gaze, the quiet authority that required no raised voice, no anger, just a composed presence that had somehow made his own actions feel small. He found himself wandering, not heading anywhere in particular, just moving forward in an attempt to clear his mind. The city's usual vibrancy faded into a muted background as he wrestled with a mix of emotions: shame, guilt, frustration, and the sting of humility. For so long he had taken pride in his job, seeing himself as a gatekeeper, the one responsible for who came and went. He had always thought he knew who belonged and who didn't, relying on a set of assumptions he'd built without ever questioning them. But today, those assumptions had shattered, leaving him with a raw awareness of his own limitations and biases. As he walked, he thought back to moments in his life where he had made similar judgments, instances where he had let appearances dictate his interactions. Each memory now seemed tainted, small flashes of moments where he might have turned someone away, dismissed them, or failed to see beyond the surface. The realization was painful, yet it was unavoidable. Dawson's words hadn't just been a reprimand. They had exposed something deeper, a flaw in how he viewed others and perhaps even himself. Eventually, he found himself standing near a small park, the quiet of the trees and open space offering a bit of relief from the noise in his head. He took a seat on a nearby bench, his shoulders slumping as he finally let himself exhale, the tension of the day slowly easing. The park was mostly empty, with only a few people scattered around: an elderly couple feeding pigeons, a mother with a stroller, a young man with a guitar playing softly under a tree. Each person, so different from the other, seemed like a reminder of Dawson's message: people aren't always what they seem. The thought struck him deeply now, its simplicity belying a complex truth he was only beginning to understand. He sat in silence for a long time, watching the world around him. The encounter with Dawson had left him with a strange feeling, an urge to make things right, though he didn't yet know how. He wondered if Dawson had seen through him the moment he approached the doors, if he had sensed the guard's dismissal right away and decided, perhaps as an act of quiet defiance, to let the situation play out. And then he thought about his own reaction, the stubborn pride, the refusal to question his own judgment, and how quickly he'd built a wall between himself and the man simply based on appearance. The minutes ticked by as he sat there, lost in thought, until the early afternoon light began to shift, casting a softer glow over the park. It was then that he realized something important. Dawson hadn't given him that look of disappointment to humiliate him. There had been compassion in the man's eyes, a sense of understanding that suggested Dawson knew what it felt like to be judged unfairly. Maybe, the guard thought, Dawson had once stood in his shoes, on the other side of an assumption, and understood the painful sting of being reduced to a surface impression. This thought stirred something inside him, a small persistent resolve that grew as he sat in the quiet of the park. He didn't know if he'd have the chance to see Dawson again, to apologize properly, but he could make a choice to change. Tomorrow, when he returned to his post, he would do so with a new understanding, a willingness to see beyond first impressions, to look deeper and to treat everyone who walked through those doors with the same respect he now knew he owed Dawson. And for the first time that day, the weight on his chest began to lift, just slightly, as he allowed himself a glimpse of the person he could become. With one last look at the peaceful scene around him, he stood up, ready to face the consequences with humility, but also with the determination to grow from them. The guard lingered a moment longer in the park, letting the gravity of his thoughts sink fully into him before he finally turned back toward the direction of his apartment. The city streets were familiar, yet today they felt different, almost as if each passerby, each stranger, carried a story he had never noticed before. He caught himself looking at people with fresh eyes, observing them with a quiet curiosity instead of the guarded judgment he'd once held. A man in a worn suit hurried by, his tie slightly askew, clutching a stack of papers under his arm. The guard watched him pass, realizing he might have once dismissed this man as careless or sloppy. Now he wondered about the man's life, his struggles, his aspirations. As he walked, the words Mr. Dawson had spoken replayed in his mind. People aren't always what they seem. The simplicity of the statement held a depth he had never considered before today. The world was filled with countless individuals, each carrying their own history, their own dreams, burdens, and regrets, details that couldn't be measured by the surface alone. He realized, almost painfully, that he had spent years reducing people to categories, labeling them in his mind before they'd even spoken. He had seen his job as gatekeeping, but now he understood that it had been gatekeeping in the wrong way. By the time he reached his apartment, the afternoon sun had begun to sink lower, casting a warm amber light across the building fronts. The guard felt exhausted, both physically and emotionally. Inside, he dropped his keys on the small table by the door and sank into the worn armchair by the window, the day's events continuing to swirl in his mind. He let his eyes drift out the window, staring blankly at the city beyond, lost in thought. The small apartment, usually a place of comfort, felt stifling in that moment. Every corner seemed to echo with the memory of his assumptions, the judgments he'd made, and the silent, unacknowledged pride he had carried in thinking he could assess people so easily. He rubbed his hands over his face, feeling a wave of regret wash over him. He had taken pride in knowing his job, in feeling like he had everything under control, and yet today he had learned that he didn't know nearly as much as he'd thought. After a few minutes, he got up and wandered over to the small bookshelf in the corner. He had always liked reading, mostly novels and thrillers, stories that let him escape the mundane rhythm of his life. His eyes drifted over the spines of books he had read and reread, but today, they felt different too. They felt like lives, stories of people he hadn't truly known or understood before. He realized with a pang of sadness that his life, outside of work, was quiet and isolated. He rarely allowed people to get close, keeping a distance out of habit, perhaps out of fear that they might see through his facade of control. Feeling the weight of his solitude, he picked up an old photo frame resting on the bookshelf. It held a picture of his younger self, standing beside his father, who had also worked in security. His father had been a quiet man, thoughtful, never one to jump to conclusions. The guard remembered his father often told him, "Everyone's got their story, son. Don't assume you know it just by looking." Back then, he had thought his father's words were soft, idealistic. The world wasn't so simple, he had thought. But now, standing there with that memory echoing in his mind, he realized his father had seen something deeper, a truth he himself had overlooked. He put the picture back, a renewed sense of purpose forming in his heart. Tomorrow, he would go to work with a different mindset. He would start fresh with an open mind, refusing to let his assumptions dictate his behavior. He would offer everyone who walked through those glass doors the respect and dignity they deserved, regardless of what they wore or how they looked. As he stood there, he knew this change wouldn't be easy. Habits like these didn't break overnight, but he felt ready for the challenge, determined to rebuild himself into someone his father would be proud of, someone Mr. Dawson could respect, and, most importantly, someone he could respect too. This would be his chance to reshape not only his approach to his job, but his entire outlook on life. Finally, he returned to his chair by the window, allowing himself a moment of quiet before tomorrow arrived. He watched as the sun dipped lower, casting a warm golden glow across the skyline, and felt a sense of calm settle over him. This was the first time he felt hope. Not the kind of hope rooted in external praise or authority, but an internal promise, a decision to be better not just for his job but for himself. And as night fell over the city, he sat there, holding that promise close, ready to begin anew. The next morning, the guard rose early, the sky still a soft gray outside his window. As he dressed, he felt a mix of nervousness and resolve brewing within him, a readiness to face whatever consequences might come from yesterday's events. He was prepared to confront his supervisors, to accept their decisions, whether that meant disciplinary action or even losing his position. But deeper than that, he was prepared to confront himself and the person he had been. For years, he had taken his authority as a shield, a way to justify his assumptions, to impose quick judgments without truly seeing people. Today, that shield felt heavy, like armor he no longer wanted to wear. Walking to work, he felt an unusual awareness of his surroundings. He passed people on the street, an elderly man selling newspapers, a group of students laughing over coffee, a mother rushing her child along the sidewalk. Each of them was living out a life as vivid and real as his own. The thought gave him pause. For the first time, he wondered about their stories, the unseen details that made up who they were, and he felt a subtle but profound shift within himself, a deepening compassion he couldn't recall feeling before. When he finally arrived at the building, he paused outside the doors, taking a steadying breath before stepping inside. The lobby was already busy with the morning rush, people filing in with the usual blend of purpose and haste. But today, he noticed things differently. The tired lines on some faces, the eager expressions on others. He felt for the first time a genuine respect for the lives that passed by, each carrying a day ahead filled with its own challenges and small victories. As he moved to his post, he noticed his supervisor, the same woman who had spoken to him so sternly the day before. She was watching him, her gaze sharp and evaluative, but this time he met her eyes with a quiet resolve, unafraid of her scrutiny. She approached him, her expression unreadable, but he could sense that she was searching for something in him, a sign that he understood, that he had learned. "Good morning," she said simply, her tone measured but not unkind. "Good morning," he replied, his voice steady, grounded in the sincerity he felt. She paused, studying him for a moment before speaking. "Mr. Dawson left an impression on a lot of people yesterday," she began, her voice carrying a note of significance. "He's a man who sees the world differently, who expects respect, but also understands how easily it's denied." She tilted her head slightly, and he could feel the weight of her words. People like him notice things. They see through people's actions to what's beneath, and yesterday, he saw something in you. The guard swallowed, feeling the familiar pang of regret. "I understand," he said, his tone low but earnest. "I let my assumptions guide me, and I know that was wrong. He hesitated, searching for the right words, aware that a simple apology wouldn't capture what he felt. "I want to do better. To be better at this job, and beyond that too." She regarded him quietly, as if weighing his words. Then a slight softening in her expression signaled that she saw something different in him now. Perhaps the sincerity he had been lacking before. "This job isn't just about security," she said, her tone shifting, almost as though she were speaking from personal experience. "It's about understanding people, knowing when to look past appearances. Mr. Dawson was trying to teach you that, and it seems you've learned." A brief silence passed between them, filled with an unspoken understanding. Finally she nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement that, despite his mistake, she was willing to give him the chance to prove himself anew. "Take it as a lesson then," she said, her voice firm but with an edge of kindness. "Every person who comes through here deserves the same respect, and I'll be watching to make sure you remember that." He nodded, a deep gratitude filling him, grateful for the chance to rebuild himself. "Thank you," he replied, his voice filled with more conviction than he'd felt in a long time. As she walked away, he felt a newfound sense of purpose settle within him. Today was a new beginning, and he was determined to approach it with humility and open-mindedness. The morning passed, and with each person he greeted, he felt a small but significant shift in his approach. A young man in work boots, a woman in a faded coat, a teenager with a hoodie pulled over his head, all were met with a welcoming nod, a respectful acknowledgement. He found himself engaging with people, not just managing them, and as the hours wore on, he felt his perspective expand with each interaction. Each individual, Each face carried a story he might never know, but he treated them with the same regard he had once reserved only for the important ones. Then, just before noon, a familiar figure appeared at the entrance. Mr. Dawson, his stride purposeful, his expression calm and composed. The guard's heart skipped, but this time it was not with fear or defensiveness. Instead, he felt a quiet readiness, a calm certainty within himself. He stepped forward, offering a respectful nod as he met Dawson's eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," he said, his voice steady but warm, holding none of the hesitation or assumption it had once carried. There was a quiet dignity in his words, a reflection of the newfound respect he felt for both Dawson and the role he played. Dawson regarded him for a moment, and a faint smile touched his lips, as if he recognized the change. He nodded, acknowledging the guard with a look that held approval, maybe even pride. "Good morning," Dawson replied, his voice soft but meaningful. He held the guard's gaze for a beat longer, an unspoken understanding passing between them, before he turned and continued on his way. As Dawson walked away, the guard felt a sense of closure, a quiet validation that he had taken his first step toward becoming the person he wanted to be. In that moment, he realized that the lessons he had learned extended far beyond the walls of the lobby, beyond his role as a guard. It was a change that would shape not just his job, but every encounter, every relationship, every choice he would make from this point forward. And with that thought, he stood a little taller, ready to meet the day, and every day after, with a heart open to seeing people for who they truly were. As the afternoon wore on, the guard found himself immersed in a rhythm that felt, for the first time, truly purposeful. Every interaction, every glance exchanged with someone passing through the lobby, carried a new weight, a sense of awareness and presence he hadn't known before. It wasn't that he had drastically changed overnight, but each moment felt like a conscious act of rebuilding, of choosing respect over assumption, openness over judgment. This subtle transformation brought with it a surprising peace, a steady resolve he hadn't expected but welcomed. He noticed things he'd overlooked in the past, a hesitant look on a young man's face as he approached, hands nervously fiddling with his ID badge, the faint lines of fatigue on an elderly woman's face who came to visit her son working in the building, a mother with her child in tow, eyes darting anxiously around as though afraid she didn't belong. Each of these small details, these glimpses into people's lives, seemed to invite him into a deeper understanding, a quiet empathy. For the first time, he was willing to extend a warmth he had kept guarded for so long. Around mid-afternoon, a maintenance worker entered, carrying a heavy toolbox and wearing a uniform slightly worn at the edges. He approached the guard's desk, and the guard greeted him with a nod, gesturing for him to continue without the usual scrutiny. The worker hesitated, then offered a small, surprised smile. It was as though he had braced himself for the typical treatment, the raised eyebrow, the quick glance up and down, the silent judgment, and found none of it. "Thank you," the worker said, his voice carrying a note of relief. He paused, adjusting his grip on the toolbox. "Usually people look at me like I'm not supposed to be here." The guard felt a pang of understanding and nodded. "We all have a job to do," he replied simply, his tone warm. "And that makes you just as important as anyone else in this building." The worker's eyes widened, a genuine appreciation flickering across his face, as if he hadn't expected this kind of acknowledgement. With a grateful nod, he went on his way, disappearing down the hall, and the guard felt an unexpected satisfaction. It was a small interaction, a brief moment, but it held a depth that went far beyond the casual exchanges he'd once had. This was different, real, a connection built on mutual respect rather than hollow words or habitual authority. As the day continued, other employees and visitors trickled through the lobby, and he welcomed each one with the same openness. He found himself smiling more, even engaging in small conversations. Nothing forced or formal, but natural, genuine. He asked about their day, nodded with interest as they shared a brief detail about their work, or simply wished them well as they passed by. The lobby, once a place he'd policed with a guarded demeanor, now felt like a space he shared with others, each interaction making it feel a little less rigid and a little more human. Late in the afternoon, he noticed a familiar face, his supervisor, walking across the lobby with her usual purposeful stride. She glanced his way, perhaps expecting the same old expression of controlled detachment she had grown accustomed to seeing in him. But he looked up, offering her a small but genuine smile, and she paused, a flicker of surprise passing across her face. For a moment they stood in silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that went beyond words. She nodded slightly, her gaze warm with approval, before continuing on her way. In that brief exchange he felt a quiet recognition, a mutual respect that didn't need verbal affirmation, but was felt deeply, quietly, between them. Just as the final wave of people began to enter for the evening shift, the guard noticed a young woman standing by the entrance, looking unsure. She wore a simple outfit, modest but neat, and clutched a small worn purse against her side. Her eyes darted around, and she took a tentative step forward, then paused, as though she weren't entirely sure if she belonged. The guard approached her, his expression open and kind. "Can I help you?" he asked gently, noticing the faint tremble in her hands as she looked up at him. She nodded, managing a small smile, though her voice wavered. "Yes, I'm here for a job interview," she explained, her tone carrying the weight of nervousness and anticipation. "I've never been to a place like this before." He felt an unexpected warmth fill him, recognizing the uncertainty in her eyes, a feeling he had seen in himself just yesterday. "Everyone has a first day somewhere," he said softly, his voice reassuring. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Her face softened, a flicker of relief and gratitude flashing across her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her tone earnest. "I was so nervous. I thought maybe I wouldn't fit in here." The guard smiled, feeling a deep sense of purpose in that moment. "You'll do just fine. Just remember, you belong here as much as anyone else." He gave her a gentle nod of encouragement, and she straightened, a new confidence in her posture as she walked toward the elevator, glancing back with a grateful smile before disappearing into the building. As he returned to his post, the guard felt something in him shift even more profoundly. He had spent years guarding the doors, deciding who came and went based on assumptions he now saw as flawed. But today, for the first time, he had welcomed people instead of policing them, invited them in rather than filtering them out, and in doing so, he had opened a door within himself, a door he hadn't realized was locked, shut tight by years of rigid thinking. The lobby grew quiet as the last of the evening shift workers arrived, and he found himself reflecting on the day's encounters, each one a small, meaningful step in a journey he hadn't anticipated, but was now fully committed to. He knew that he couldn't undo the mistakes he'd made, couldn't erase the moment he had dismissed Mr. Dawson. But he could make each day from now on a testament to what he had learned, a living acknowledgement of the simple but powerful truth Mr. Dawson had offered him. As the city lights flickered on outside, casting a warm glow through the glass doors, the guard stood a little taller, feeling for the first time, not like a gatekeeper, but like a part of something larger, something shared. He was ready to greet each new face, each story, with an open heart, to honor the lesson he had learned not just with words, but with every action, every nod, every smile. And as the day faded into evening, he knew that this was only the beginning of a journey toward becoming a person he could respect, someone who saw people for who they truly were. As the evening shift wound down, the guard found himself standing alone in the now quiet lobby, the day's events replaying in his mind like a series of small but meaningful scenes. The stillness felt different tonight, almost comforting, as though the lobby itself had transformed along with him. In the quiet, he felt a kind of peace he hadn't known before, a subtle but profound feeling that he had shifted from simply occupying this space to becoming a part of it. He thought about the faces he'd seen today, the nervous young woman, the maintenance worker, and even Mr. Dawson. Each one, in their own way, had contributed to this transformation, helping him step out from behind the invisible barriers he'd once relied on. He realized that, up until now, he had lived by rigid rules, certain they would keep him safe, secure, in control. But now those very rules felt confining, as if he had been looking at the world through a small, narrow window when there was a much larger view outside, waiting to be seen. The faint hum of the building's ventilation system was the only sound as he took a slow walk around the perimeter of the lobby, his footsteps echoing softly. He noticed details he hadn't appreciated before, the intricate pattern of the marble floor, the subtle beauty of the high glass windows that allowed the city lights to filter in with a warm glow, the simple elegance of the space he'd patrolled for years without a second thought. These surroundings, which had once seemed purely functional, felt different now, almost alive. It struck him that the space wasn't just a place for rules and procedures. It was a place where lives intersected, where people brought their hopes, fears, ambitions, and vulnerabilities. As he stood by the entrance, looking out at the city beyond, he felt a rare sense of humility and gratitude. It was strange to think that a single encounter with Mr. Dawson had opened him to a broader perspective, had reminded him of values he hadn't considered in years: kindness, respect, and genuine connection. Dawson's calm demeanor and quiet lesson had pierced the guard's carefully constructed view of himself, revealing the person he truly wanted to be. He no longer saw people as passers-by to be managed, but as individuals, each deserving acknowledgement. He looked down at his hands, worn from years of work, hands that had once enforced rigid boundaries but were now open to the world around him. This job was no longer just about maintaining order. It was about embracing the life that flowed through these doors, about recognizing the importance of each interaction, however small. As he stood by the glass doors, gazing out at the city's glow, the guard felt a pull to step outside, as if the vast world beyond held something he needed to feel closer to. The quiet lobby, the soft lights, and the empty halls all felt somehow connected to the world just beyond his reach. He pushed the door open and took a few steps onto the plaza, where the evening air was cool and refreshing. The city lights cast a warm glow around him, illuminating the streets, where a few late workers and passers-by moved at a slower, more reflective pace than the morning rush. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the cool night air, feeling grounded yet inspired in a way he hadn't felt before. Standing there, he noticed small scenes unfolding in the streets. A couple walking hand in hand, their quiet conversation drifting on the breeze. A street musician playing a gentle tune on his saxophone, filling the night with an unexpected warmth. A young man jogging with headphones in, his expression focused but peaceful. It all felt so vivid, as though he were watching life through a new lens, each detail alive with meaning. He realized, with a pang of both regret and newfound appreciation, that he had spent so long observing life without truly seeing it. He had filtered his perception of others through a narrow view, keeping himself apart from the richness of human connection and shared experience. As he looked around, the guard's thoughts drifted back to his father, to the memory of his quiet wisdom and gentle way with people. He remembered how his father would stop and talk with anyone, no matter who they were or what they looked like. His father had seen people deeply, always looking past the surface, treating every person with respect and kindness. The guard had often brushed this off as unnecessary, thinking his father too soft for the world he had chosen to work in. But tonight, he understood. His father had known something essential about life, something he had taken for granted until Mr. Dawson's unexpected lesson shook him awake. He walked a few steps further, toward a bench overlooking the plaza, and took a seat, letting the night settle around him. The sounds of the city faded into a comfortable hum, and for a moment, he felt a sense of release, a lightness he hadn't known he'd been missing. It was as if he had been holding onto a weight he hadn't recognized until now. A need to control, to judge, to keep people and situations in neat, manageable boxes. But now, sitting here under the vast night sky, he felt that weight begin to fall away, piece by piece. His thoughts turned back to the faces he'd encountered throughout the day. He thought of the young woman coming in for her interview, her nervousness a reminder of his own beginnings, of the uncertainty he'd once felt. He thought of the maintenance worker, carrying his toolbox with a quiet pride, overlooked and underappreciated, yet essential to the building's daily operations. He thought of his supervisor, who had looked at him with a mix of disappointment and hope, giving him a chance to prove he could change. Each of them had revealed a piece of a world he had closed himself off from, a world where kindness, respect, and understanding mattered more than control. Finally, he thought of Mr. Dawson. The man had seen through him with such calm clarity, offering not anger or reprimand, but a gentle reminder of who he could be. Dawson had treated him with the respect he hadn't earned, and in doing so, had ignited a change that now felt as vital as the air he breathed. The guard wondered if Dawson had planned this encounter, or if it had simply unfolded naturally, a lesson offered by someone who knew how the world could easily diminish a person by their appearance. Whatever the case, Dawson's message had reached him deeply, echoing in his mind as he sat there, watching the quiet life around him. As he sat on the bench, he made a silent promise to himself, a commitment to carry forward the lesson Dawson had gifted him. He would make each interaction an opportunity to honor that lesson, to look beyond what he saw on the surface, to approach each person with an openness he had long neglected. This job, this role he'd spent years simply performing, now felt like a calling, a chance to actively shape his own growth while honoring the lives that passed through his care. He would guard not only the entrance, but the dignity of everyone who crossed it, knowing that each person carried a story worth respecting. The city lights softened as the night deepened, casting a warm glow over the streets, and he felt a strange but powerful contentment. This transformation, he realized, was something he would carry forward, a new way of being that extended beyond his work. He would bring it into every encounter, every conversation, every relationship, and as he rose from the bench, ready to return to his post with a new sense of purpose, he understood that this journey of growth had only just begun. With one last look at the city spread out before him, he walked back into the building, feeling as though he were stepping into a new chapter of his life, one where he would be not just a guard, but a witness to humanity, ready to greet the world with open eyes and an open heart. As he walked back into the building, the guard felt an inner calm he hadn't known before, each step carrying him deeper into a sense of belonging, not just to the job, but to something far more meaningful. The lobby lights glowed softly, illuminating the space that now felt like a living part of him. He took his place by the entrance, greeting a few late workers heading out. Each one met with a small nod and a genuine warmth that hadn't been there before. Even those who barely glanced his way seemed to sense the shift, responding with quick smiles or polite nods of their own, acknowledging the newfound openness in his presence. As the hours wore on, he reflected on how much this simple shift in perspective had changed his entire outlook. He was no longer simply a fixture by the door, no longer standing guard with a rigid sense of duty that isolated him from others. Now, he felt himself as a part of the ebb and flow of life within these walls, a quiet but present observer of the lives that moved around him. And with this newfound understanding came a sense of peace, as though he had finally found his place in the fabric of something larger, something shared. Close to midnight, just as he was preparing for the night crew to arrive, he noticed a familiar face stepping into the lobby. It was his supervisor, the same woman who had spoken to him so firmly and yet compassionately after his encounter with Dawson. Her presence was unexpected at this late hour, and he straightened, feeling a mix of curiosity and respect as she approached. She paused a few steps away, studying him with a discerning look, her expression softer than before, but still serious. "I wanted to check in on you," she said, her voice low but carrying a warmth he hadn't often heard from her. "You've had a big day." The guard nodded, unable to hide the small, genuine smile that rose to his face. "Yes, ma'am," he replied quietly, a sense of gratitude in his voice. It's been, transformative, to say the least. She looked at him thoughtfully, her eyes revealing a hint of satisfaction, as if she could see the shift that had taken place within him. "I can see that," she said, crossing her arms gently. "Sometimes it only takes one moment, one encounter, to make us question everything we think we know." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words, understanding that she too had seen her share of such moments. "Mr. Dawson showed me something I hadn't been willing to see," he admitted, his voice humble. "He made me realize that this job isn't just about following rules or keeping people in line. It's about respect and understanding." She smiled faintly, a proud glimmer in her eyes. "You're starting to understand what really matters here," she said. "It's never just about the rules, though they have their place. It's about the people, about seeing them for who they are and not what we assume. That's a rare quality, one that most people take a lifetime to learn." A comfortable silence settled between them as her words sank in, deepening the lesson he was still absorbing. Finally, she reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Keep growing," she said, her voice carrying both encouragement and a gentle challenge. "This building could use more people like you, people willing to look beyond the surface." He nodded, his heart swelling with a quiet pride and a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you," he replied, the words simple but heartfelt. He knew that this acknowledgement, this understanding, wasn't just about today's events. It was about the journey ahead, a commitment to becoming the person he truly wanted to be. As his supervisor turned and walked away, he watched her go with a feeling of gratitude he couldn't quite put into words. She had given him the space to learn, to grow, and now she had offered him the encouragement he needed to continue that journey. And as he resumed his place by the door, he felt a calm determination settle within him, a promise to himself that he would honor this experience in every day to come. The lobby was quiet once more, but in that silence he felt a richness, a fullness he had never noticed before. It was the quiet hum of lives intersecting, of people passing through with their own stories, dreams, and struggles, each one deserving of the respect he had learned to give. He stood there, ready to greet each new face, each new story, with the openness and humility that now defined him, knowing that no matter how small, he had a role in making their day just a bit better, a bit kinder. The hours drifted by, and as the city outside settled into the calm of early morning, the guard remained by his post, embracing the peaceful solitude of the lobby. Each sound, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the occasional shuffle of footsteps, felt like part of a symphony he was just beginning to appreciate. He was no longer merely an observer at a threshold. He was a part of the rhythm, the quiet pulse of life that continued through the night. His sense of purpose had deepened, transformed from a mere job to a commitment that extended beyond the walls of this building. As dawn approached, he glanced up at the growing light outside, the sky shifting from a deep indigo to a softer shade of early morning blue. The change felt symbolic, almost as if nature itself mirrored the inner shift he had undergone. The quiet dawn brought with it the subtle sounds of the city waking up, and soon the first wave of early arrivals would walk through those doors. The guard felt ready, truly ready, not only for the day ahead but for the new chapter of his life. A little after 6, as the first signs of activity stirred in the lobby, he saw a familiar figure entering, the young woman from yesterday, the one who had come nervously for her interview. She was no longer clutching her purse with that telltale grip of uncertainty. Instead, she walked in with a steady, more confident step, her expression lighter, a small smile on her lips. Seeing her this way, the guard felt a quiet pride bloom within him, a sense that he had played a small role in her journey, offering her the encouragement she'd needed to feel she belonged. As she approached the entrance, she spotted him and paused, her face lighting up in recognition. She gave him a friendly nod, and he returned the gesture with a warm smile. This time, their exchange was unspoken yet profound. The guard realized that his simple words of encouragement had meant more to her than he could have imagined. In the same way that Mr. Dawson's quiet reminder had shifted his world, he had, in some small way, helped shape hers. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and bright. "Thank you for yesterday." "Good morning," he replied warmly, feeling a swell of pride. "Congratulations. You earned it." She beamed at him, a quiet gratitude in her eyes, before heading toward the elevators. Watching her walk away, he felt the weight of his role settle into him in a new way. His interactions mattered. His words, his presence, his respect for others. It all mattered. This was no longer a job to him. It was a calling, an opportunity to extend respect, kindness, and humanity to everyone who passed through. As the morning went on, the lobby gradually filled with the familiar faces of regular employees, each one acknowledging him with friendly nods, waves, or brief exchanges. He felt connected to them in a way he hadn't before. Every person, every smile, every nod was part of the tapestry of this building, a place he had once approached with rigid control but now embraced with an open heart. He realized that each interaction was a chance to make a positive impact, no matter how small, and that each person who crossed his path could benefit from a moment of kindness. Just before noon, he noticed a commotion near the entrance, a gathering of executives and employees all seemingly waiting for someone. The guard, curious but composed, watched from a distance until he saw who had captured their attention. Mr. Dawson. He was returning, this time with his familiar dignified stride, and the group around him greeted him with respect and admiration. The guard took a steadying breath, feeling both anticipation and gratitude as Dawson approached. He straightened, meeting Dawson's gaze as he drew closer. This time there was no confusion, no assumption, only a shared understanding that had blossomed from their encounter. Dawson stopped in front of him, a calm smile on his face, and for a moment they stood there, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. "Good to see you again," Dawson said, his voice low but warm. The guard nodded, his voice steady with gratitude. "It's good to see you too, sir. Thank you for everything." Dawson's smile deepened and he inclined his head, as if recognizing the change that had taken place. "You're welcome," he replied simply, his tone conveying an unspoken pride. "I had a feeling you'd understand." The guard felt a surge of respect for the man who had, in a single moment, managed to teach him a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. Dawson's quiet wisdom had opened his eyes, and he knew now that this was the true essence of leadership. The ability to inspire growth without force, to bring about change through compassion and respect. As Dawson walked away, surrounded by his colleagues, the guard stood with a renewed sense of purpose, his heart full. He watched Dawson leave, feeling as though he were seeing off not just a visitor but a mentor, a guide who had helped him find a part of himself he hadn't known was there. The lobby, once a place of rigid order, now felt alive, filled with potential for meaningful connections. Each person who walked through was an opportunity to honor Dawson's lesson, to make the world just a bit kinder. As the day came to a close, the guard looked around the now familiar lobby, feeling it settle into a place of comfort and purpose. He knew there would be challenges ahead, moments where he would be tested, tempted to revert to his old ways. But now he carried something with him, a commitment, a promise to himself and to others. He would continue to greet every individual who entered with respect and dignity, not because it was his duty, but because it was a reflection of the person he had chosen to become. And as he locked the doors that evening, stepping into the cool air outside, he felt a calm assurance. This wasn't just a job anymore. It was a journey of growth, an opportunity to contribute kindness to the world, one interaction at a time. With his heart open and his purpose clear, he walked into the night, ready for whatever the next day and the days beyond would bring. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness, respect, and seeing beyond appearances. Stay tuned for more impactful content.